Hi, I'm Phil, and some time ago the check engine light came on my instrument cluster. I took my trusty OBD2 Bluetooth connector from Amazon and plugged it into the OBD2 connector on the car. All cars have had these since the mid-1990s, and it's usually somewhere in one of the footwells. With that connected to my phone and using the Talk app, I could pull the error logs, and I saw a P0441 Evaporative Emission System Incorrect Purge Flow. What does that mean? And more importantly, how do we fix it? Well, I happen to have here a simplified diagram of how an engine works. I say simplified, it's still a little bit complicated, so we'll break it down into manageable chunks. This is the engine, and it wants three main things to do its job. It wants petrol from the petrol tank, which is drawn up via the high-pressure pump, and it's stratified and injected into the cylinder block, the stratified injected there being the S and the I in TFSI. The more you know. Along with the petrol, we need air, so that comes in via the air intake here, where it meets the petrol, and it's set fire to via the spark plug. Boom! Lots of little explosions form our internal combustion engine, which is how the car moves forwards or backwards. Once our little explosions have happened, there are some waste gases which are pumped out through the exhaust system via some catalytic converters, which convert the bad gases into slightly less bad gases. Yes, that's all well and good, Phil. We know how an engine works, but what's this EVAP thing and what's wrong with it? I'm glad you asked. That is the point of this video, after all. Petrol is a volatile substance, and that means it evaporates continuously, and that's a problem because it can cause pressure to build up. Now, in older cars, that pressure just used to be released somewhere via a valve, and there's plenty of videos on YouTube of cars farting. That's the pressure being released. But in more modern cars, we have a more environmentally friendly solution, which makes the car more efficient, as well as getting rid of that petrol smell from the farts. There's an extra line coming off of the petrol tank here into something called an activated charcoal filter, and that's like a little battery, if you like, for the petrol vapour. That pressure can then be released at the appropriate time by the ECU via the fuel tank breather valve, and that gets released directly into the air intake, which obviously then goes straight into the engine. Now that has a number of benefits. Number one, you don't get that petrol smell anymore, and number two, you're not wasting petrol because it's going straight back into the engine. Brilliant. Makes it better for the environment as well. Now it's these two things here that are the EVAP system, the N80 valve and your charcoal filter, which is actually just a plastic box full of charcoal. Did you know that was in your car? I didn't until mine went wrong. Somewhere between your petrol tank and the intake, something has gone wrong. It could be one of these pipes. It could be the fuel tank breather valve. Now, pipes, when they get old, they become hard, they become brittle, they split, and then they start leaking, which isn't ideal. But for me, it was the fuel tank breather valve that was a problem. And according to the internet, certainly as much as I've Googled, that N80 valve does seem to be the culprit most of the time. Naughty, naughty. Its typical method of failure is that it no longer operates. It's either stuck open or stuck closed, and the ECU has determined that it can't control it anymore, and thus it has thrown the error onto your dashboard. But why has this thing failed? Well, remember our activated charcoal filter? That's a consumable item. That has a shelf life. Did you know it had a shelf life? I didn't know that. It's not a service item. Nobody ever changes it, but it will fail, and if yours hasn't, and you're watching this video for some reason, yours will fail, unless you're driving an e-car. Then why are you watching this video? Anyway, the reason why it's a consumable item is because over a period of time it becomes completely impregnated with petrol and doesn't really do its job at storing and releasing vapours very well anymore. But it's not normally a problem, and your car will tootle along just fine. Not necessarily great for the environment, because that means there's more vapour being released somewhere, but it's usually fine for the car. The problem comes when that activated charcoal filter starts to break down. You see, there's a couple of filters on the filter, which are kind of like a felt substance that prevent the little pieces of charcoal coming out and going into the pipework. Nobody wants that. And what's very common, and happened in my case, is that little pieces of charcoal did escape from that charcoal filter and came into the fuel tank breather valve, clogging the damn thing up. Unfortunately, that inevitably resulted in its demise, but thankfully, fixing this is quite easy. Now, I should say at this point, if you're in any doubt as to what's wrong with your car, just take it to a mechanic, an actual mechanic that knows what they're doing. They will fix it for you. It won't be that expensive, unless you take it to Audi, and then everything will be fine. But if you do want to give this a go yourself, it's not too bad. Everything is easily accessible under the bonnet. Now you could just change the N80 valve, but it is worth just checking that your activated charcoal filter is still good. Take the pipes off, have a look, see if any of the charcoal has leaked. If it hasn't, might be okay. But if you can see little pieces of charcoal, you probably want to replace that too. Now a fuel tank breather valve you can pick up for around £10. If you want to get a Bosch one, which is what Audi will actually use, it's about £20. So I went for a Bosch one myself because why not? The activated charcoal filter, on the other hand, my goodness me, it's a black plastic box filled with activated charcoal. It shouldn't be that expensive, but Audi will charge you at least £100 for the damn thing. It's outrageous, it's daylight robbery. You can pick up an off-branded one from Amazon or your other favourite part supplier for about £30, which is much more reasonable in my opinion. Whilst you're there changing the activated charcoal filter, it makes sense to change the two pipes coming into it. And that's because, while you're there, the pipes aren't that expensive, and actually because they're quite brittle, you might damage them taking them off. As it turns out for me, I couldn't get the other end of the pipe off where they connect into the car, and so I didn't bother changing mine, and it's been fine. So proceed at your own risk. Anyway, enough of the waffle, let's watch me doing it. First things first, we have to open up the bonnet by pulling the release lever just inside the driver's door. Opening up the bonnet, we reveal the beautiful TTS engine bay. The N80 valve is hiding just at the bottom right of the engine cover, and the charcoal canister is towards the bottom left of it. We need to take off the engine cover to get access to the N80 valve, and it's held in place with 3 posts, 2 at the top and 1 at the bottom. With a bit of a yank here and there, we can get it off to reveal the engine. The N80 valve has 2 pipe clamps we need to remove and the electrical connector. Here's the new N80 valve by Bosch, all shiny and presumably in working condition. I'm going to be replacing the existing crimp ear hose clamps with these worm drive hose clips because the original ones will be destroyed in the process of removing them. We could use proper Audi hose clamps to put these back on, but of course the OEM Audi clamps and tool are expensive. I start by unclipping some wiring from one of the N80's hoses and then remove a connector from another component to gain easier access to the N80. Using a flathead screwdriver, I gently prise off the hose clamp, which takes a bit of effort. The N80's electrical connector is then removed, which I'd tried to do earlier, but it was at this point it decided to release for me. With the help of a small Allen key, I remove this other connector to get the wiring loom out of the way, again creating better access to the N80. The hoses have pretty much fused to the N80, so it took me some time to get it to loosen up. Eventually, with some gentle encouragement, I managed to get the hose off. Remove the second clip in the same manner as the first, and then the old N80 can have the same wiggle to remove treatment. The old N80 is now removed, showing off its Audi and Bosch branding. Put on hose clips of the appropriate size onto the hoses and gently wiggle the new N80 valve into place. Tighten up the hose clamps, taking care not to overdo it because the N80 is only plastic after all. Once done, reconnect all the connectors you removed and clip the wire back onto the hose. Moving on to the EVAP canister now, and you can see what I mean about the expiry date, only a 2-year shelf life. We can see the canister's filter and the connecting hooks on the back. That bottom one is particularly tricky. The big hose pops off the canister. Again, it takes some time and some amount of force. The other hose can be released with some pliers and gentle wiggling action. To remove the canister, we just have to pull it upwards, but that bottom clip proved a bit too grabby for me, so I used some wire behind it to help prise it open. Looking at the old EVAP canister, we can clearly see little pieces of charcoal have started to escape. Comparing the old and new side by side here. The new canister drops into place with a simple click, and the big hose pops back on with some downwards force. The small hose goes back on the same way it came off, with some pliers and wiggling action. My job is done, and it's time to make sure the engine still runs. Success! The engine management light has gone away too. After doing anything like this, it's always wise to take the car for a little drive just to confirm everything is working as expected. That wasn't too bad, was it? And if you're wondering why I've got an air filter, an ignition coil and a spark plug on my desk, it's because those are my next jobs. They're not just props. They are real. They do work. They better work. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you found it useful, and if you did, I'll see you again. Until then, good luck. I'm not putting these in my car right now because it's 10 to 10 at night. And that's not happening. Phil, why do you have a really expensive torque wrench? Well, do you know what? Buying a torque wrench and buying your own spark plugs and then putting them into your own car yourself, probably still cheaper than getting Audi to do it for you.